This is screen capture video 9.1 for the unit that covers photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, in some ways, can be described as the opposite of aerobic respiration. It's not entirely, but you'll see some similarities in the opposite of aerobic respiration as we talk about it. Photosynthesis involves transforming kinetic energy in the form of light energy into potential energy, which is biochemical energy that's stored in the bonds of chemicals. The net equation for photosynthesis is usually given 6 carbon dioxides, CO2, and that is referred to as inorganic carbon, joined with 6 water molecules, H2O, with light energy driving the reactions. A carbohydrate's formed, and we generally show that as glucose, C6H12O6, and 6 oxygen molecules, O2. And we'll talk about how these are formed, how they enter, how they leave the plant, and the different types of reactions that are involved with photosynthesis. So, taking these low energy molecules with the help of light energy, reforming the atoms, detaching, reattaching them to form a high energy molecule of glucose, and then the oxygen which is released. When you look at plant material, here's willow leaf. If you look at a cross section of this this illustration, you can see the mesophyll cells, and the mesophyll cells contain these little green dots which are supposed to represent chloroplasts. And on the upper side, and especially on the lower side of the leaf, this is true of land plants, generally have more on the lower side of the leaf, are these openings called stoma or stomata. That's Greek for mouth. If you can imagine these 2 cells that are green colored that are on the epidermis of the leaf, it almost appears as though they're lips that are pressed against the edge, and the opening would be the mouth, or the stoma or stomata. Carbon dioxide can enter the stomata to get into the leaf and dissolve into the watery portion of the leaf. Oxygen, which is produced in photosynthesis, can leave, and also water leaves. And the water is being pulled up into the leaf from the root system generally, and some of it does leave through the leaf. It evaporates and the plant loses it, and some of that water is not used in photosynthesis. It's just lost, especially in the hot summer months. Over here on the far right, it's showing a mesophyll cell with many chloroplasts in it. And if we scroll down just a little bit, one of these chloroplasts is illustrated, and it's showing an outer membrane, an inner membrane. There's the stroma, that's the watery portion inside, which bathes these grana. Grana is plural for granum. A granum is a stack of thylakoids, and each one of these disc-like structures is called a thylakoid. The stroma and the thylakoids become important as we discuss photosynthesis, so it helps to understand the structure of the chloroplast. Over here to the left, in this screen capture, we have a micrograph, an actual picture of a chloroplast, and you can see the grana, and it's a little bit difficult to tell. You almost have to use your imagination, but there are many thylakoids in a given granum, and of course in the stroma would be the watery portion that bathes the grana. In experiments that have been done, it's been possible to radioactively label the oxygen in the carbon dioxide and to see where it goes in photosynthesis. And at the end of photosynthesis, it's noticed that the oxygen ends up from the carbon dioxide in the carbohydrate and in the water molecules that are produced. Actually, there's a little bit of water produced. We generally just show the net equation of photosynthesis. In another experiment, they labeled the oxygen in the water, and they saw that it went into the production of oxygen. So you think of the oxygen and carbon dioxide, it goes into the makeup of the carbohydrate. The oxygen in the water goes into the makeup of oxygen gas, which is released from the plant. In this illustration, we can see where the different atoms are going. Of course, there's only one place for the carbon to go, and that's into the carbohydrate. The oxygen from the carbon dioxide can go into the carbohydrate and into the water molecule. The hydrogen of water ends up going into the carbohydrate and a little bit of water that's produced. And of course, as just mentioned, the oxygen in the water goes into the makeup of oxygen gas. If you ever take a chemistry class, you talk about redox reactions. They happen simultaneously, as one substance is being reduced, another is being oxidized. When you think of something being reduced, it has electrons added to it, usually in the form of hydrogens. That's what's happening to the carbon dioxide. It's being reduced, and we have this higher energy molecule that's being produced. Water's losing hydrogen, so it's being oxidized. When you're looking at aerobic respiration, the glucose molecule is oxidized and oxygen is reduced, shown here. When you consider photosynthesis as a whole, you step back and take a look at the big picture. We understand that sunlight is the ultimate energy source. It's driving photosynthesis. There's enough energy in sunlight that it will hit some molecules and cause chemical reactions to occur. Energy is transformed from this potential energy, energy of motion, and light is moving, to energy of position or stored energy in the form of chemicals. So this light energy is harnessed eventually to produce high energy molecules such as ATP and NADPH. That's done initially in what are called the light reactions, or the light-dependent reactions. And these occur, it says here in the grana, especially across the thylakoid membrane. Water is involved in this process. It's broken up with the help of light energy driving the breakup of that reaction, and oxygen is produced. That's released, and eventually released out of the plant through the stoma into the environment. It should be noted, our land plants give us oxygen. They produce oxygen for us, but it's been said that the photosynthetic algae of the ocean produces most of the oxygen on Earth. So when people talk about planting a tree to produce oxygen, it's nice. It makes them feel good, warm and fuzzy, but in reality, it's not producing as much oxygen as other types of photosynthetic organisms. The ATP and the NADPH, and NADPH is similar to the NADH we studied with aerobic respiration. It is also a high energy molecule. Those go to run what's called the Calvin cycle, or the light independent reactions. They used to be called the dark reactions. They've tried to get away from that. These high energy molecules help fix inorganic carbon, which is carbon dioxide, into an organic form. And the ATP and NADPH are oxidized. Energy is released to cause carbon dioxide to be reduced to form some kind of a sugar or a carbohydrate. And then these NADPs and ADPs are then put back into the light reactions to be converted back to ATP and NADPH. It helps to understand the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum runs far beyond what we can see with our unaided eyes. Our eyes only detect a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, just a very, very small part. And the visible light is what we can detect. It runs from purple to red. And the next time you see a rainbow or you see a prism, light moving through crystal, maybe sometimes through water, where a prism is formed, you'll notice on one end of the color spectrum you have purple, on the other end you have red. Another name for purple is violet. And hence, just beyond violet is a stronger, more powerful wavelength that's shorter called ultraviolet. And it's strong enough, it can do damage to our chromosomes, and our bodies try to protect us against it. We know that it can damage other types of things besides living organisms, besides chromosomes. Some paints, some materials will break down in the presence of ultraviolet light. Further down the electromagnetic spectrum, with shorter wavelengths and stronger, more powerful rays, are the X-rays. And we understand that if you want to stop X-rays, you can use lead or a thick wall, and that will slow down the X-rays so that they don't damage cells and especially chromosomes. It's possible a person can be exposed to multiple doses of X-rays and suffer skin cancer, or if the reproductive cells in their reproductive organs are exposed to it, it can cause permanent birth defects. The strongest, most powerful rays that can be emitted that we know about are what are called gamma rays. Very short wavelengths, but very powerful. It takes many feet of concrete or many feet of lead to slow down the gamma rays. And concrete is one of the ways that radioactive material is encased and made safer. When Chernobyl blew, when it melted down in, I believe, 1996, helicopters overflew the power plant in the Ukraine and dropped many tons of concrete on the nuclear reactors to try to entomb them and slow down the spread of radiation. It was gamma radiation that they were concerned about. The electromagnetic spectrum that's above red would be infrared, longer wavelengths, less power, less energy, and not as dangerous. A lot of times it's the infrared spectrum that is used in night vision goggles, night vision scopes. And sometimes, it used to be, and they've gotten better with this, but it used to be when they would use lights or lamps to illuminate in the infrared range, there'd be a little bit of spillover into the red, the visible red, and so a person could actually see the glow of the red. Because to get the best images with infrared, they wanted to get the wavelengths close to visible red light, and it would bleed over and actually show visible red light. There are some animals that can detect infrared light. It appears that some of the insects can. And if you had infrared film and you took pictures of some vegetation, such as flowers, you'd be able to see some patterns on the flowers that some liken them to landing strips that direct the insect to the flower to properly pollinate it. Microwaves, radio waves, UHF, VHF rays, those are even longer wavelength, less powerful, but those are used in the commercial industry here in the United States. With the visible wavelength of light, different wavelengths can be used and utilized. Oftentimes it's the green that is not utilized, that's reflected, and that's why we see it. The other wavelengths tend to be absorbed. Sometimes there are some reds and oranges that are not used but are reflected, and we'll see those certain times of the year. Should be mentioned that light can be measured in different forms. It can be measured in joules, it can be measured in photons. I believe Albert Einstein used the term photon and used photons to describe light energy, and sometimes they're described as packets of light energy, and so light would be described as having so many photons. When light hits the chlorophyll molecules in the thylakoids, much of the light is absorbed. As I mentioned, the green light is reflected. That's why we see plants as being green, the leaves and the photosynthetic parts. And some of those wavelengths are captured by the chlorophyll and are used to drive reactions, and some can